All right, Raider Nation, we are getting down to it. 2 weeks and counting until we are in Kansas City for the start of the 2023 NFL Draft Night 1, which of course features the Raiders sitting there at number 7 overall. So many options available to Dave Ziegler, to Josh McDaniels, and the entire decision-making crew here in Las Vegas. Rhett Lewis and Bucky Brooks back here with you to try to provide some context on those decisions and on this draft class. Bucky, man, I'm starting to get a little anxious here. I'm starting to get a little, that curiosity is heightened. We're talking about players we know that are going to the draft now. It's that time, man. I'm ready to do this thing.
Yeah, it is that time. And just so everyone understands where we are in the process when it comes to working behind the team, let's go behind the curtain. And so
Yes.
when you have 2 weeks before you get into the draft, this is when everyone is back in town. You're going through your draft meetings. Everyone is kind of putting their final arguments in place in terms of trying to set the board and those things. So you have the medical team now has the information. They'll start kind of sprinkling some things in to clean up the medical evaluation part of the scouting report. The background stuff, you have a director of security who kind of works hand in hand with the league to get all the background information on all of the possible prospects that you can entertain. And so you're putting that stuff together. And then you're having the coaches and the scouts beginning to discuss, okay, how do we want to rank these guys from whatever 1 to 10 by position, or how do we want to rank the final board, whether it's 150 guys on the board or some guys teams have it as tight as 75 to 100 total players on the board. And so you're having these discussions to make sure that you stack the order correctly, because you have what we call the horizontal board, where you look at all the prospects and they're divvied up by position. So quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, offensive tackles, interior linemen. Then you go to the defense side of the board, your edge rushers, D tackles, linebackers, corners, and safeties. And so you have it where you can look at it side to side horizontally, but then you also have a sideboard that just ranks players 1 to 100. And so it's just like a top 100, no matter what the position. This is how we take them off the board. If we were playing pick up in the park, this is the first pick, the second pick, third pick, on and on. And so these last 2 weeks are about finalizing that part and then taking care of some administrative stuff where, hey, let's make sure we got correct numbers on the player, 2 numbers. Let's make sure we have the agent's number. Let's make sure we have a different number, because, Rhett, for most teams, you want to make sure that you talk to the prospect before you hand in the card.
There's a proof of life, right? For real.
Pick up the phone. Hey, Rhett Lewis. Okay, this is
we good?
Bucky Brooks from the Raiders. I just want to make sure you're doing. How you doing? You doing okay? You with your family? Good. All right. We just want to check in, make sure you're good. Hey, is this the best number to reach you on draft day? Give me an alternate number just in case, like, we can't catch you on this one. Do you have another number? Where are you going to watch the draft at? Where you at your parents' house? Okay, let's just make sure we have all of your means of contact, because we want to make sure we get that phone call in so I can hear you and be like, okay, hand in the card. We're good.
I mean, like, it seems like, oh, that's ridiculous. But, like, yeah, you don't want to be sitting there, like, thinking you're going to pick a guy and be like, I can't get a hold of this dude. I don't know where he's at. Can we still pick him? Like, are we still good here? Like, yeah, there are those things. Yeah. And now look, I think as we sit here 2 weeks out and under now, as people are listening to this podcast, like, the draft board is set. Right? Like, the prospects are set. Like, we've been talking about these dudes and we've been watching tape for weeks and months now. Like, we've got our stacks. There might be some tweaking here and there, especially, as you say, based on the medicals that continue to come in, some of the background stuff that continues to come in. Those things, if guys are close, right, there are those things that might help break a tie here. Gosh, these two, we got similar grades on these guys. You know what? This is just a little bit cleaner on the medical side. Maybe that helps us, right? Like, those discussions are taking place too, right?
Yeah, those discussions are definitely taking place, and you're trying to figure out how to break up the clusters. We talk about on Paths of the Draft, clusters, how we separate multiple guys that are similarly graded at the same area. And so sometimes it's the film, sometimes it's the combine and the workouts and the numbers. Sometimes it's digging into the background, trying to figure out, like, which one has more potential based on their aptitude and their ability to learn and process and all of those other things. And so there's a lot that goes into this. And so it's not just a random happenstance in terms of why you take players or why you pick someone in the first round compared to the second round. Now, it doesn't always work out, but the one thing you can never knock is everyone tries to do their due diligence on every player so they feel good about the player that they eventually try and pick and add to the team.
Yeah, look, exactly right. And we've got a couple more episodes of this show left here for you before the draft, including today's, where we are going to get into last week. We kind of touched on the defensive line and the linebackers, the front seven guys. We talked about the edge players, the interior D linemen, the linebackers that the Raiders could be intrigued by either at number 7, at number 38, and beyond as we go. Some really valuable draft capital for GM Dave Ziegler, head coach Josh McDaniels, owner Mark Davis, and the entire crew here. This is a big draft. This is an opportunity to really help, I don't want to say remake, but fine-tune this roster to get back to the postseason, to make the type of run that Raiders fans expect. And this draft will go a long way to doing that. So we're going to dig into a few more of those players that could be in play from the cornerback and safety groups here. And yeah, you could see this is a position of need. This is where, we've seen some guys leave through free agency, want to kind of help fill the depth of that roster, maybe find yourself a starter on day 1 or day 2 and see where we go from there. So we'll dig into that. Also coming down the pipe here over the course of the next couple of weeks, those first round scenarios, the scenarios at 7, there's a lot. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Trades up, trades back, different players that'll be available at 7, different positions that you could go with there, and then the players within those positions. I'm actually going to put a piece out next week on Raiders.com that'll outline some of those positions. We'll talk about that next week. Bucky, I'm going to try my hand at a 7-round mock draft.
Why would you want to put yourself through?
Let's do that. Come on. I'm going to give you every Raiders pick. No, not all 200. Only the Raiders. 7 round, yes.
Holy smokes! Because I was like, yes. Rhett, why? What are we doing? You need
no.
Need
it's
more
impossible.
time. You need
it's impossible.
Now that would be great. Like to see a dream scenario for best pick per round.
Per round,
for the Raiders. That would be outstanding. That would have been nice exercise. I thought you were talking about just
I can't do all 260. I can't do it.
Man, I was like, that's a lot of brain power.
Our buddy Chad Ryder can do it. I can't get there, and so I'm going to have that for you draft week on Raiders.com, so keep an eye out for that. Bucky's got some great content coming down the pipe as well. So let's dig into visit season as it continues here before we really get to draft week, when kind of prospects kind of shut it down a little bit. Teams kind of get tightened up here a little bit. You don't hear as much coming out, so you got to kind of decipher everything. So let's take what we get when we can get some of these smoke signals here, and let's talk about some of these visits, because the corners and the safeties, just according to various reports and guys that have come through the building in Henderson, have been a popular position group amongst the Raiders' 30 allotted visits that they can schedule. I'm just going to lay out a couple of names, and then we'll start going through it here just to kind of give everybody a glimpse of the types of players, again, that are coming through. So we'll start with guys like Eli Ricks from Alabama, cornerback that has a ton of talent that, is not yet talked about amongst that top 4, 5, 6 players at that position, but could wind up being a player like that when it's all said and done. Keely Ringo, big long corner from Georgia coming in to visit as it was scheduled. And then you're looking at players like Jamie Robinson, a safety from Florida State, Trey Hodges-Tomlinson from TCU, a little bit smaller in size, bigger in feisty competitiveness. Jordan Howden from Minnesota, a local pro day guy that's going to come in. Brian Branch, who we might classify as a safety, could very well be the top nickel corner in this draft. So a lot of these type of guys. Joey Porter Jr. Is on the list for the Raiders. And we were looking at players like Deonte Banks, who we've kind of seen mocked in that, that bottom third of the first round, right? And so maybe if there is a trade back scenario, Deonte Banks could be a player that could be intriguing for Las Vegas. Or maybe he has a higher grade. Maybe he carries a higher grade within the Raiders draft room and could be in play a bit earlier than has been talked about it. So that's kind of the deal. Let's start with your top group of cornerbacks. Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon from Illinois, who was my latest mock draft choice for the Raiders at number 7. And then you're looking at players like Cam Smith and Deonte Banks up there as well. So give me a primer on those guys that lead off this corner class.
Okay, so before I give you a primer on the big guys, let's talk about the guys that came in on the visits and what is important to know.
Let's do that.
Eli Ricks comes in from Alabama. Eli Ricks was a 5-star recruit, went to LSU, started immediately at LSU, had a lot of success, had some injuries and those things, found his way to Alabama and kind of contributed in a role-playing situation. Here's why it could be significant for him to walk through the building with the Raiders. Antonio Pierce, linebacker coach for the Raiders, was a prominent high school coach at Long Beach Poly.
Let's go. Put the dots together.
In Southern California for a long time. Also, we worked hand in hand together with the opening and those things. So he's seen a lot of these guys come through. He also was coaching at Arizona State, where I'm sure he recruited this guy. So the intel that he and some of the other coaches on staff that have come from college may have on some of these players could make a difference. So Eli Ricks coming through is significant. When you said the name, it just kind of popped.
It clicked for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Brian Branch being a kind of versatile defender coming from Alabama. The reason why it clicks is let's think about the ties to Nick Saban, which brings ties to Bill Belichick, which brings a familiarity with some of the base concepts of the system. Could want to tap into some of those things when you think about that part of it. You talk about some of the other players that come through. There's some connections where you want to do it. A lot of times you want to bring those guys through because you know them, you may know them on tape, but now let's have a conversation with them about what they know, how quickly they can adapt and do all those other things. You have to remember with the Raiders, you want high IQ players, high character players that kind of fit within the scheme. And so sometimes you bring those guys in to see, okay, I think they fit on tape, but now I need to be around them to see if they really fit what we want to do and how we want to flip the building as we try and get this thing up and going at the next level.
Let me ask you about another player that you mentioned that we came in that is, had been reported to come in on a visit in Keely Ringo. Big corner, right? Played at Georgia. There's been talk about, wonder if his eventual NFL home is at safety. That the kind of thing you might approach with a player on a visit like this pre-draft?
Oh, yeah. You want to assess his football IQ. You want to see where he is. You want to understand the learning and those things. Keely Ringo is another guy that was we talk about a big time recruit coming out of school. But then let's also understand he's a guy that's coming from the West Coast, played his high school ball in Arizona, grew up in Tacoma, Washington. He was another guy that was on the circuit, on the tour, so people had a chance to get around him. Talk about Kirby Smart's system being very similar to Nick Saban's system, which is also similar to Belichick's system. You have all those things. But then you talk about a remarkable world-class athlete. You look at the times that he had in 100 and 200 respectively in high school. We're talking about a guy that is at the upper echelon of athletic profiles. You want to bring that guy in because you don't get a chance to see him move around, but you saw him move around at the combine. Now you want to talk to him and just kind of see how does he fit? What does he know? What would we have to teach him to get him ready to play? All of these things matter. And when you only have 30 visits, people talk about, you're giving up smoke signals and those things. But look, that's worth the reward in terms of knowing who you're bringing into the building. Because if culture is everything, you want to make sure that these guys are great cultural fits.
Yeah, look, I agree. And so, I think he is an intriguing player that is often talked about just outside of that top and upper echelon of the cornerback class. But if you see the traits and you understand the person, then maybe it gives you a better picture of what the player could ultimately be. After all, what we're talking about here are projections when we're making these picks. So I think, again, a visit coming in for a player like that is very important, especially as you consider the Raiders at 7. That's probably not the Keely Ringo area, but maybe 38 is. Maybe 38 is.
And so I would say the connection that you pull when you listen to those names are more day 2 guys. The day 1 guys we know about. Like we've talked about those guys. And how many of those guys are really top 10 guys? Maybe you could talk yourself into Devon Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez as top 10 guys. I think that it kind of stops there. Joey Porter Jr. Some of the other guys are more, I would say, mid to late
10 to
first round
20.
talents based on how you project them to come into the league and play. But the early guys, you may want to bring them through. It's interesting with the Raiders picking up at the top and picking there. So many different scenarios have to come into play based on what happens with the quarterbacks. So you have to be able to, okay, what we do if we're at 7? What we do if we move up? What would happen if we move back? What players would be in range? And so assessing those guys, talking to those guys, having a level of familiarity and comfort with those players enables you to maybe move up and down the board to get the right players and maybe some currency that you want in future drafts.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of those scenarios, and like we don't often talk about teams moving up in the top 10 for a non-quarterback, but it could happen. It could happen. Let's say, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and again, I'll dig into all this stuff on my scenarios for the Raiders, using that number 7 pick as the driving force there. But yeah, if Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson are still on the board at 5, and there's a chance you could get one or the other. Lions went Aiden Hutchinson last year. We call in the Lions to say, hey, let me jump up here and just make sure I get one of these top flight edge rushers to pair with Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, or or Jalen Carter is slipping a little bit, and maybe that is something you're kind of considering here on the interior. There are those types of scenarios. The other scenario that I look at when I see Brian Branch's name, 7 probably a little early, 38 maybe a little late. I've actually mocked him recently in an exercise that had him going 22 to the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah,
I know how they really enjoy their Alabama Crimson Tide players, but I think that maybe if the guy that you really set on at 7 is gone and the value you think doesn't match up with the top player on your board, maybe that's a move back spot. And maybe Brian Branch comes into play if you can move back. Let's say you're in the 20s now. Or you make a pick at 7, and then you use, by the way, 5 picks in the top 109. You use 109 to help you move up from 38. Let's say either into that 31 spot and get that 5th-year option, or, into one of the first 5 picks of the second round to try to get a player like Branch. Because I feel like he could merit that with the type of production he's capable of from that nickel spot, even though we do love Nate Hobbs and we know what he can bring to the table as a nickel player.
Yeah, your job as a talent evaluator, a team builder, is to always evaluate every possible prospect and see if they can contribute and help your team go to the next level. And even if that creates a level of competition, everyone is going to benefit from being in a very competitive environment. The income, the guy who's already there, who's having to battle for it, and the new guy who is coming in trying to swipe the job, all those things raise the level of intensity of your team. And so we'll see that. We'll see people talk about some of these guys that might be projections and just kind of see, can he challenge them in year 1, or is this one that is going to be a little longer in terms of the developmental process?
Yeah. So again, those are a couple of names, and a couple of folks that could be really intriguing as we get a little bit further down the line. Again, Deonte Banks fits that bill, right? He was a guy that really kind of popped up onto the radar for at least for folks like us when we see him, run 4.3 40-yard dash coming out of Maryland. Now you're like, well, hold on a second. This dude can fly. What does Deonte Banks look like to you?
So Deonte Banks is interesting because Deonte Banks is what we call a HWS, a height, weight, speed demon. You just don't see guys that are built like that have the kind of success that he has on the corner because he has superior athletic attributes. When you go back and you watch him, and I'm sitting here looking at my notes, excellent size and speed, long rangy press corner. He was almost 100% at the line of scrimmage in bump and run coverage. Didn't appear to have great top end play speed, but he found a way to be in good position more times than not. Great tackler, very physical. So now, as I think about that, and I think about how the Raiders want to continue to evolve, is you have to have someone who can tackle on the perimeter, knock people down. You talk about the quarterback that you face. You have to deal with not only the quarterback within the division, you got to deal with the big guys on the outside. So, for instance, everyone will focus on Pat Mahomes and the wide receivers that he has. They're talking about Scott Moore and like some of these other MVS guys on the perimeter that can make plays. But what about the Chargers and those big guys? Mike Williams, over 6 feet. Keenan Allen, another big corner. You have to get guys that can match up with that. And so some of this is doing due diligence on the guys that you want to have match up and be possible erasers on the perimeter, take care of some of the things that you have to deal with in the division.
Yeah, and I like that. I love those types of little pieces of information that, again, help you get a better picture of the prospect. And, I'm looking at another couple of visits. Juju Brents from Kansas State is a guy that you identified as a, sleeper is yeah, but look, he's probably a late 2, early 3, or maybe a little bit ahead of that. Feels like a guy that maybe could be in play with one of those 2 third-round selections, maybe number 70 for the Raiders, but a guy that has played the outside corner position a fair amount at Kansas State, so maybe gives you some depth in that regard.
Yeah, he's a really good player, man. And he's such a good player because he has size, he has length, he has a very versatile and adaptable game, meaning he can play in any system. He can do a variety of different things when it comes to using technique to put himself in a position to be in the right spot when the ball is thrown. And we talk about scrappy players from K-State, high IQ, will get after it. He appears to have the qualities that you look for. Now it's about identifying the right value. Where does he stack up compared to what's in the building? And how do we project him playing out long-term once he gets here and gets settled in?
Yep. Good one there. Again, another couple of names to just kind of file away from the cornerback spot. Sevyn Banks, guy who started his career at Ohio State, finished at LSU. Virtual visit, as was reported, with the Raiders. Alex Austin from Oregon State, another guy that's in that group. And then there's some smaller school guys that, maybe not in the stream of consciousness nationally, but again, when you get down into the 6th and the 7th round and you're starting to kind of,
your specialty, 6th and 7th round. This is where you find them. That's right. It's the hidden gems, the Rhett Lewis specials.
I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, and let me see if I can go back and find this. If I am mocking my 6th or 7th round selections, and I'm telling you right now, Raider Nation, if you see Tyler Richardson, cornerback from Tiffin, showing up there, don't be surprised. Guy, again, reported to have interactions with the Raiders leading up to this draft. All right. We've kind of touched in and around those players at the top of the cornerback group, but who is your very top player at that group? And would they, in fact, be in play, do you think, for the Raiders at 7?
Devon Witherspoon is my top guy in that group. He checks off all the boxes as a franchise quarterback. Tough, competitive, high IQ, has a lot of scheme diversity in terms of being exposed to a bunch of different things and can play well in man zone. However you want to align him, playing press, playing off, he can do all of those things. I think the big thing for me is he plays with a level of maturity that you just see that he has been a film nut. The plays that he makes are not just on reaction. It's on anticipation because he knows what's to come because he's done dirty work. To me, he's CB1. And the guy that's right behind him, Christian Gonzalez, is very similar, even though their games are different on the tape. Really good with the preparation, pretty meticulous about how he gets his body ready to go play and perform. And then when he has an opportunity to play and make plays, he makes those plays, not only at Oregon, but he made them at Colorado. Yeah. Really big on both of those guys. Those guys are the special ones in this class.
Yeah, I do feel like that as well. I mean, Spoon will come up and he'll sting you, and we've seen that time and time again on his tape. And I love that kind of feistiness from a corner. Speaking of feisty, a guy that may not fit the prototypical size profile, especially out on the perimeter as a corner, Trey Hodges-Tomlinson, your Thorpe Award winner, got the LT lineage. He is the nephew of the Hall of Famer LaDainian Tomlinson. Real competitive dude. He does draw some flags from time to time for maybe being a bit over aggressive. Yeah. How do you look at a player like that may not fit your traditional norms of size, but maybe can bring it, as just one of those dudes that's a ball player?
You always go for ball players. Now, you got to put the right value on when you go after the ball player, but you like to see the ball player on tape. And you're talking about him in those terms. Hey, man, he doesn't have all the height, weight, speed, but he is a player. He is a guy that gets after it. He loves the moment. He is feisty and competitive, and so he's going to come here and he's going to irk some guys in terms of how he plays, but he's going to make the team better because he's such a key contributor. I think that has to factor into the evaluation. It has to be a big part of why you take certain guys. Do you have the nastiness? Do you have the physicality? Do you have the tough? Do you have the mentality to play for us? Because everyone can't play for us. If you're the personnel guy, if you're the coach, you arrogantly say everyone's not going to be a fit for us, and so we're fine bypassing some to opt for greater in other capacities. And so, love it.
You know who's my comp for Trey Hodges-Tomlinson? You don't have to look too far. Amik Robertson, already on the Las Vegas Raiders roster. Amik is a feisty dude, and love watching him play. And I think that'd be, if you're looking for, guys that kind of fit similar molds, look, that might be one of them right there with Trey Hodges-Tomlinson. And then just lastly, before we touch briefly on the safety position, another nickel that we saw in Las Vegas that was, reported to have some interactions with the Raiders, Keitrell Clark from Louisville. Eric Galko, who runs the Shrine game, said he wouldn't be surprised if he ends up as the best cornerback in this class. I think right now that distinction belongs to Brian Branch, but Keitrell Clark, again, another dude that is an aggressive player and has played both inside and outside at Louisville, but definitely raised some eyebrows in Las Vegas at the Shrine game for his work inside as a player in that slot role.
Loved his work. Loved how he took the coaching. I loved how he took what he was asked to do and put it on the field. Preparation was on point, and his performance was also on point because he was so diligent in his preparation process. What I love about him is his ability to play in the slot, command it, to own it, to deal with those two-way goals and all the other stuff that is problematic for a lot of defenders in the slot. He plays at a different pace. Everything is slow for him. He's active. He anticipates where the ball is going to come out, and man, he makes plays on it. And so he is underrated. Not enough people talking about him, but I kind of feel like in the league, guys kind of know who he is.
Yeah, I would say so. Now the safety position, as we make our transition there, is, I don't know, it feels like it's a little bit more of an unknown because, we're talking about guys that are probably going to hear their name called, on day 2, second round, third round, but you can maybe find some real value there looking at players like, if we're taking Brian Branch out of that group, you're looking at players like Jordan Battle, his teammate at Alabama. You're looking at the Browns, Sidney Brown, the identical twin brother of Chase Brown, the running back at Illinois, and then Jair Brown at Penn State, another key piece to a really talented secondary the last few years there in Happy Valley. You're talking about Jamie Robinson from Florida State.
Florida State, natural nickel, yes.
Yeah, he's another nickel, right? So there's another one that has some of that positional versatility for you, depending on where you want to use him. But the three guys that I talked about there, Battle, Sidney, and Jair Brown, you could find them all over the place. You could find them as a sub linebacker. You could find them as a post safety. You could find them, in coverage. And so having all of those skill sets available, I think, again, starts to up that value.
Yeah, it does up the value. Just having all of those guys with what we would call it complementary skills, being able to play a variety of different things, being able to kind of fill the voids that you currently have on your roster because they do have scheme diverse games. You want to see that part of it. And when I think about the way the nickel position, because you were talking about Brian Branch, the way that position is evolving, you got to have a guy that is tough enough to play like a linebacker, to be effective against the run while also having the skills to really disrupt the passing game. There are not many guys who can do that. And we've kind of got to the point where everyone just talks about like, hey, the nickel or the star position in that old Bill Parcells, Nick Saban system. That guy has to be a dude. He has to be half man, half amazing when it comes to being half linebacker, half DB.
Yeah, good points. Good points all around. But out of the safety group, out of the more traditional safety group, if we're taking the nickels out of it, who do you like amongst that position pool?
So this is funny. We're talking about more traditional safeties. I would say that you have a handful of guys that can do things at or near the line of scrimmage. Your guy from Illinois, Sidney Brown, is very interesting because if Mr. Davis was alive, this would be his guy, Mr. Davis, the late Al Davis, because if you check off certain boxes when it comes to speed and
You're now Davis
explosiveness,
guy. Yes.
yeah, you're not. So I'm looking at Sidney Brown with 4.47 speed in the 40. I'm thinking about him with his 40.5-inch vertical, his 10-10 broad jump, the fact that he got up on the bench and did 225 23 times
Pretty
to
good.
go with an on-field resume that last year features 6 interceptions, 13 passes defense, and 59 total tackles. And when you think about 10 career interceptions in general, that's a lot to say. There's a lot of stuff that's screaming Sidney Brown could be and should be a Raider. Particularly, you talked about that pick. Was it 38?
38.
Yeah, somewhere.
I wouldn't wait till 70.
45.
I wouldn't wait till 70. That's what
He
I'm
ain't
saying.
gonna be there.
He's
not
going
gonna
to be gone.
there. No,
I
he's
feel
not
that
gonna
way
be there.
too. And then lastly, before we get out of here on the safety group, maybe a little bit of a contrast with Sidney Brown is Jair in that he doesn't check the elite athleticism scores there, 4.65 in the 40. But you're talking about the only player in FBS last year that had at least 4 sacks and at least 4 picks. Also tied for the FBS lead back in 21 with 6 picks. So you're talking about 10 picks the last 2 years. He has enough athleticism to at least make enough plays on the ball, right? So, I mean, like, there's a little bit of a contrast there.
Yeah, a lot of contrast. And here's the great thing. Josh McDaniels, those guys come from a situation where they valued like high IQ,
yes, that's
smart guys that can handle a heavy mental workload while playing. This guy can do it. This guy's done it. This guy is terrific. He was terrific at Penn State in terms of being around the ball, playing hard, playing on instincts, playing faster than that listed time of 4.65. He is active. He's aware. He'll thump. He'll hit. By all accounts, the people at Penn State swear by him in terms of his leadership ability on the field. And so, look, we can ding him a little bit. We can kind of subtract some things off his total score, but he's coming off the board by the end of the day too. He is a really good player, Jair Brown.
No question. Really excited about it. So look, that and look, let me leave you with one more thought here, because I know that Jonathan Abram had a complicated tenure here in Las Vegas. Loved the physicality. Got exposed in some other areas at times. No longer a Raider, still in the league, trying to do his thing. Telling you, there's a player in this draft that brings the wood that way, that also has the versatility to move around. Go check out Antonio Johnson from Texas.
Oh yeah, look at that. Antonio Johnson, I had him down in my notes. You're right.
Yeah.
He does have a lot of that versatility. And first thing that shows in my notes, I have absolutely very aggressive, but half field safety with nickel potential. He does a lot at A&M. Good call there, Super Scout Rhett.
Well, just keep that file that one away. All right,
38.
That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Raiders NFL Draft Podcast. For Bucky Brooks, I'm Rhett Lewis. Thanks again for being with us. We'll be back with you next week when we'll start running through all of those scenarios that the Raiders could find themselves in with that 7th overall pick. We'll do it next week. Until then, have a great one, everybody.